G'day listeners and welcome back to another episode of the Keeper League podcast. With our AFL Fantasy podcast, it doesn't talk about the superstars when they talk about the lesser knowns and the players that are going to bring value to your draft and Keeper League teams. My name's Hef and I'm joined by my co-host Kays. How you going, mate?
Not too bad, Hef. And geez, tonight we're going to talk about some lesser knowns.
Yeah, well, definitely. There are some superstars in there. Well, guys that are 2G, 4P anyway, but yeah, there's quite a few lesser knowns. I think I know what you're getting at because I saw a bit of a Twitter rant from you today about the state of the trade period. And, well, not rant today, but I guess over the last few weeks. You're not a big fan of the trade period. Talk us through that, Case.
Trade period is the trade period. I don't think we're trying to the AFL are trying to commercialise it too much, right? Everyone's been so upset that it was such a shitty trade period, so boring, no big names went. But it's probably because they had 17, I think it was 17 days of basically 24/7 coverage of a trade period where most of the times we might have had maybe the average would be 1.2 players moved per day. So it's just been overhyped, oversaturated. So anything is boring when you are focusing on something 24/7. Like if you're watching your lawn grow out the back every second of every day, you're not going to be excited when it grows. But if you don't look at it for 2 weeks, you'll be like, oh man, it's grown. How cool is that?
I do get your point of view, but I think a lot of people compare it to the American style of things where
completely different.
Well, we could be the same.
You couldn't be the same.
If we tried, we could do it. Well, like I said, if there was more invested into it, it wasn't just online. If there was more interest from the public, I think that's the difference. Definitely our perception. I think US are way more into this kind of period. I think Australians in general are just more. They don't give a shit about it as much as they probably could or should. I think we're a bit more laxy-daisy and not as fanatical as say other supporting codes are.
We don't have the money
overseas.
or the teams of the states.
I know, but still, I don't know. I think it could be. I do kind of agree with you. It doesn't work here, but we've seen other codes do it. So I don't know.
But if you look at the soccer transfer period, right, for example, a player could go to any team in the whole entire world in that month. So of course it's exciting. Whereas a player could go to one of other 17 clubs or get delisted. So it's not really where's the hype? There's no money. There's no actual, there's no teams to kind of trade with each other about.
There could be there was that article that came out today where you could say force teams to players to move teams against their will type thing, just like it is in the US and America. That would make it more exciting, but I guess there's financial things and things like that.
We don't earn enough. Those players don't earn enough money to get moved.
Yeah, but so I know people that haven't earned enough that their companies have told them they have to move cities if they want to keep working for this company, or they have to go to another city if they want to keep working in this industry, which is I know plenty of people that have had to say move to Canberra to start their careers and things like that.
Sure.
Why is that any different for an AFL player?
It's not really, but we're just common people.
Oh yeah, we just look after the elites and don't look after the little
totally
guys.
Agree. But that's the thing. But it's not they're not getting moved for life-changing sums of money. Sure, I'm not going to sneeze at 300, 400K, but an NBA player probably earns $8-10 million a year. That means that their family would never have to work again.
But like I said, my mate, he moves to Canberra for 80 grand because that's the only place he can get a job. That's what he does.
That's just what life is, unfortunately, for us plebs.
Anyway, we'll get stuck into the podcast in a second, but we will thank Remedy Kombucha. Oh, I should be using this camera. I've got a new camera, ladies and gentlemen. It's pretty sweet. It's got a little
shirt on.
Oh, you do have the shirt on. That's
what I learned from Trade Radio. Just keep plugging sponsors.
Yeah, that's a great idea. But yeah, Kays, we had to actually postpone the podcast from recording from Sunday. You had a bit of a gut issue. Is that right?
Genuine gut issue. I did.
So, were you not drinking enough Remedy Kombucha? Is that the issue?
No, and I've been kind of avoiding all fizzy drink until my guts are settled. So
isn't this the ultimate thing for fizzy drink and?
Maybe we'll find out. I'll find out. I'll tell you how I'm going tomorrow. This could be the absolute game changer my stomach needs at the moment.
Oh, well, I hope it doesn't, whatever you've got doesn't, make me sick. But
no.
I know I'm perfectly safe because I've got this Remedy Kombucha.
You drink 3 remedies a day.
I have been drinking quite a few. These ones go out of date tomorrow, so I've been absolutely smashing them to get through. I'm thinking about just taking them to work and palming off to people. But we'll see how we go. Anyways, let's get stuck into the trade recap. All right, we'll move into the trade recap. We'll go through every player that moved clubs. And, Kays, put your phone away, mate.
Sorry.
We'll go through every player that changed clubs and talk about, I guess, what it means for their fantasy game and maybe for some of the players that they leave behind at their old clubs, who it gives opportunities to, who it strangles, and so forth. So we'll start off with probably one of the biggest names of the trade period, definitely 2G4P, and that is Jordan Dawson. So I reckon he's in for a big season next year, Case. So I think the Crows will play him as a wing because they lack their outside run. They've been playing Seedsman and Scholl there quite a bit. I think there's someone else that's been playing on a wing in the latter half of the season, but I can't remember who it was. But generally at the start of the year, well, most of the year was Seedsman and Scholl, and they kind of shown that, with the amount that Scholl kind of got dropped as well, that they were lacking a bit of class on that wing. So I think Jordan Dawson's going to be that guy for the outside run going forward. It's going to be good for his fantasy game. I think he'll receive a bit of a bump, but I think it's going to be bad for his defender status long term because I think there's going to be a lot of people relying on him in their defence, but I think he's going to be firmly in that Crows midfield. But just looking at City players as well, like hopefully someone like Dylan Stephens can actually get a gig now that I know he's coming into his third year and he struggled last year, but that's a wing spot that's earned vacant. But someone like Errol Goulden could actually come back and go onto that wing and benefit as well because that was his position as a junior, and we've seen what a good fantasy scorer who he is. So it's really hard to tell who could get a bump at City because McInerney...
Chad Warner.
Yeah, Chad Warner. McInerney was playing on the wing, went to half back. But looking at some of Jordan Dawson's stats, so he averaged 88.8 for the season, but his last 3 rounds, he averaged 105.7. Now, there was 154 in the last round, which, I think that's a bit of an outlier. But if you do look at the last 5-round average, he was averaging 103. And then over the last 10 rounds, he averaged 100 from the last 10. So, and that's when he moved to the wing at Sydney, moved out of defence. So I think he's in for a big season and a big career at Adelaide. I think his defender status is in danger. Would you agree?
Totally agree. Yep, I'm 100% on board. A big Jordan Dawson bump. I know your boy Cam from the Draft Doctors was a little bit, maybe he's a trade high person, but I completely disagree. I think Seedsman was averaging like 96 or something on the wing for the Crows, and Dawson's going to come in and be that prime ball mover. I like that Dawson can kick goals going forward. He can play back as well, so he's incredibly versatile. He's that pure utility, and if you're excited because 1, you're the biggest Jordan Dawson man I know. Number 2, you go for Port. Number 3, he didn't choose Port, so if he's a Crow, this might be the first Crows player you've ever owned, and you're excited about him.
I don't know if it's the first Crows player I've ever owned, but look, I'm definitely excited about what he can do at the Crows, that's for sure. I'm backing Jordan Dawson in. I reckon he's in for a big year, so I'm pretty happy with that trade, especially for my fantasy team as an owner. So we'll move on. Another lesser known is Darcy Fort. So he went to Brisbane, and I reckon this is just a bit of a nothing one for fantasy. Archie Smith retired, so they're basically just picking him up for more depth. They play Tom Fullerton as their backup ruck forward anyway, so I don't see him really getting too much of a run. The thing is, though, we were big on him a few years ago in the SANFL fantasy scores in the year he got drafted, because he did have a big year in the SANFL that year. So just one that we did kind of like. So he's shown he's had some fantasy pedigree, but in the VFL he hasn't really done much since he's been moved over. So
no, it's true. But I think like if you're going to have to take him as a handcuff if you're a Oscar McInerney owner, for example. But like say OMAC goes down, I think that Fort has the capacity to come in and be a number 1 ruckman at Brisbane over someone like Fullerton. Like Fullerton hasn't really proven his wares just yet. So like he's going to be obviously, only draftable if you're handcuffing, I think, but would be one who wouldn't surprise if he did play as the solo ruckman and scored quite well.
Yeah, no, I do. He's more of a pure ruck than say something Fullerton is. But yeah, I guess it depends on injuries. I guess he's there break glass in case of emergency type thing. But yeah, just a hole filler for Brisbane, which they need. We'll move on to Adam Chera. So I'd say it's probably the second biggest trade of the trade period. It's quite up there. But yeah, it's one of the bigger ones anyway. But it's going to be interesting to see where they use him really, because we know he's capable as an inside midfielder and he's played that before. But he's also pretty effective on the wing for Freo at times this year as well. So they did chop and change him a bit this year. And the thing which has been interesting with Carlton is that they have used Walsh on a wing before as well, but he's obviously now becoming an elite midfielder. So I'm not sure if they're filling a gap there and they're planning on playing Chera on the outside. We're going to have to wait and see what happens. But there's talk of Cripps going forward this season as well. And you've got Kennedy, who came in halfway through and tore it up. Then you've got Georgie Hewitt, who comes in, who will definitely be playing, we think he'll definitely be playing midfield. I think he was recruited for a purpose. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what the midfield makeup is going to be. And also, what do you think, Hayes? What does this mean for the likes of Dow and Fisher as well?
Just sliding more and more down that depth roster, I think. But yeah, look, you're bringing in a cream of the crop player like Chera, who's going to be a star for the next 10 years. I think him and Walsh are going to be the 2 cogs in there, and almost Patrick Cripps will be the 3rd stringer. Like I think if Carlton are going to actually develop and threaten for finals or threaten for top 4 even, who knows, I think they need Chera and Walsh both fit, firing and kind of leading that club into the future. So if you're a Cerra owner, I wouldn't be worried whatsoever. But if you're earning some of those fringe players, I think Kennedy's probably the big one in the gun. And with Hewitt's arrival as well. So just be wary of that. But I've got no issues with Cerra being a star next year.
Yeah, I don't think like he's going to receive like a huge bump or anything, but that his natural progression will just follow and he'll turn into just a decent midfielder. It's not like, because I think the kind of depth is pretty similar to Fremantle, and I think a role he plays quite similar as well. But I just think he'll progress naturally as well. I spoke to him just before though, Georgie Hewitt. You're a big fan of this guy, Kaz.
I do like
I owned
Georgie
him in a league, but I think you've been on him for longer than I have. So tell us about Georgie Hewitt and what do you think about that trade?
He's just one of those boys who I think's just always solid. He was never going to win you a game, but I don't think he's that player that will cost you a game starting him either. Look, he did have a pretty solid 2021 season after missing most of 2020 with injury. Did take him a while to get going, only averaged 64 in the end, but came home strong, averaged 77 in his last 5 and scored 290 in his last 2. I think that kind of 80-90 range is his kind of go. He should come into next season fully fit, and the club obviously wanted him. They signed him for 4 years on fairly big money, so you're not going to do that without a role for him. Assume that Michael Voss is a fan of him as well, because that would have been his call. So I think that's a big tick for his job security if the new coach wants you in. I think it's really bad news for someone like Will Setterfield. I don't think we'll see him again AFL level. Probably hurts. These two rivals probably hurt, your Jack Nunes as well. Even what as it does for Matt Kennedy, we touched on. He's the one that's really tough because he finished the season off in a bang. Is Ed Curnow not going to play too much footy this year because, he's that kind of in and under rugged mid that Hewitt can play. So going to be a real watch and see at the moment. But I think with Hewitt, he's going to lose that back status. I think he played enough mid-time at Sydney late last year. So that's going to be a big issue if you're an owner there. But look, I think with a redraft, he's going to be a good round 3, 4, 5 option just to give your midfield a bit of depth, especially if you're challenging for a flag. Just a player who'll play most weeks and score all right.
I will add that at the end of the season, just looking at all the champion data classifications, that George Hewitt was still classified as a back. Ooh. But the common sense rule, I think, means he's most likely going to be a midfielder, I think. Because that's where he intended to play, and it's where he played towards the end of the season, saw a big bump. And that does include finals as well, and he was a sole midfielder in the finals as well. So I think there'll be a bit of a common sense rule applied to that, and I think he will get mid only. The one I'm more sure of, like Setterfield, I'm not so concerned. Like, he was going to go anyway, I think, because he's more of an outside player too, with Cerra. That kind of kills him as well, and he's one I actually forgot to talk about in the Cerra kind of segment. But yeah, I think Kennedy is the one that many people were pretty high on. He'll obviously lose forward status, so he's going to be less valuable anyway, but he was still scoring so well. But he's a pretty similar mould to Kennedy as well. So that might be a bit more of a struggle there for a bit of power there, and to see who comes out on top in terms of the fantasy scoring. We'll move on to Lewis Young. So he also went to Carlton. Geez, Carlton was a destination club this year, they're all saying. So many big names.
Nothing like finishing ninth.
Anyway, Lewis Young, he was used as a gap filler at Western Bulldogs, essentially. Like, he was recruited as a forward, then they used him as a ruck throughout the year and in some of the finals as well. He can obviously play down back, though, because he's been training there a little bit as well, and Carlton have actually said they want to use him as a key defender this year. So I just, I don't think he's actually got any fantasy relevance, though. Like, they're pretty well rounded in the defensive stocks, Carlton are, and if he's playing as a key defender, I just don't see him getting any fantasy bump whatsoever. Averaged 50 last season. That's with spending a fair bit of time playing in the ruck as well. So yeah, I just don't see that jumping. Do you agree?
Totally agree.
All right, let's move on to another lesser known Nathan Kruger case.
Yeah, look, went over to Collingwood from Geelong. I think he's pretty well hyped up as a good key forward prospect, but just hasn't really proved himself at AFL level yet, especially in a fantasy sense. I think he'll give the Pies a better long-term option than someone like Mason Cox. So I think he's out of contract or delisted, or I don't even know what he's...
Mason Cox is... I think there's talk that he'll get another contract.
He'll get a contract?
Yeah.
I think he's right on the cut line. But I think it's obviously he's going to be the next person in line there. But look, Darcy Cameron was playing good footy lately, so I think it's going to be hard for Kruger to break into the side from round 1. Bit of a wait and see, but he's that tall key forward prospect. I do love my key forwards, Hef, but I think he's still needs a bit of work before I get excited about Krugs.
Yeah, I'm the same. Do you think they call him Freddie?
Surely.
Freddy Krueger? Yeah,
Surely.
that'd have to be his nickname. That's pretty lame by me. I probably should be more creative than that.
You should be.
Yeah, I'm now embarrassed by that. But anyway, speaking of embarrassing or embarrassments, because I reckon you are going to embarrass yourself this next segment. You're going to profess your love for a certain player that also moved to Collingwood.
This actually might be the biggest trade of the pre-season, of the off-season, because he's going to be the best player of the lot.
Probably the best keeper league relevant player of the pre-season. I think, your Cheras and your Dawsons are quite big.
Sure, but they're boring. It's all about Patrick Lipinski. 2020 is officially Lipinski's season. Look, if you look back at some of his numbers, he averaged 85 in 2019, played 13 games there, and also scored 3 tons. He just never got a proper crack at the Dogs, just genuinely got bevoed. And look, it's easy to see the Bulldogs midfield was extremely good. You've got guys like Libba, McRae, Bont, the list goes on. So it's a hard midfield to crack. I think with Collingwood, new coach, they're kind of at the point where they're in rebuild mode. So full rebuild mode, you just can see still Sidebottom playing permanent forward, maybe Scotty Pendlebury across half forward or half back. They're just going to get someone like Lipinski and just get him in that midfield, let him play that natural inside mid game, which he's really good at. I think he's just going to score because he's got proven pedigree, scored well in a very stacked midfield when he was at the Dogs. So I think the sky's the limit. 23 years old, he is ready to go.
He's definitely got the fantasy pedigree we've seen in the past. My concern more so is like with. I don't think he's going to be terrible at Collingwood or anything like that, but I'm more worried about like the development of players like the Browns, like Callum and Tyler Brown, who are getting a few CBAs before injury struck those guys. And then also someone like Finn McRae as well, who was starting to get a few CBAs towards the end of the season. It's just, and then they've got, they got Taylor Adams in there, they've got Crisp that can go through there as well. Plus your Pendles, if you keep playing him there, there's probably someone else I'm missing. I'm bad with depth, but yeah.
But if some of the depth, like, Chris Mayne's retired, so he's out. Not that Levi Greenwood is playing much or Braden Sire, but, even Josh Thomas.
Greenwood's retired too, I think.
Yeah, retired as well. So it's like, they've lost a few of those depth players. So that potentially keeps some of those younger kids in that side. But I think they've obviously got Lipinski in for a reason. 23
DeGoey, sorry.
DeGoey, yeah. But I think he's going to complement that midfield nicely and hopefully take the next step in his career.
Yeah, I do think so too. I think it just might stifle some of the other kids that we could be getting excited about. We might have to wait another year or two to see those guys. But that's the only downside to the Lipinski trade. But I think owners of him will be pretty happy. And especially if you're in a league like ours, he's going to be on the line where you cut and keep, and you're really going to be monitoring that pre-season to see how he goes. I'm going to talk about another kind of lesser known or just a nothing one, which is Jake Kelly, which is for fantasy anyway. I think it's going to be good for Essendon, but I just can't see a scoring bump here or anything. Like, he's never averaged over 67. That was his like complete best season, and that wasn't even a BCV score. He's more of a lockdown type, but the positive about it is that it should free up Jordan Ridley though. And he quite often has to play those defensive roles last year, which killed his scoring halfway through the year. So I think it's good news for Ridley owners, but geez, it's a bit of a stacked defense down there at Essendon. What do you think? You're a Bombers man. What's your opinion on this pickup?
I'm actually very happy with the Jake Kelly pickup from a footy point of view. I think we just needed a proper lockdown defender, no fuss. And I do think he'll just free up a couple of those more attacking guys. Maybe it means that Redmond can play a bit more aggressive. Ridley as well. I suppose the thing to think about with the Essendon defence, we do play a pretty fantasy friendly game back there. Now, I'm not saying that Jake Kelly's a starter or anything week in, week out, but if you're coming to one of your last picks of the draft and you just need a bit of cover or depth cover in your defence, I reckon he's not the worst because he'll get a few cheap marks and kicks back there, just the way we kind of chip it around and run from that defence. So I think, if you look from a fantasy point of view, I think he's not the worst really, really late pickup.
Yeah, and look, if this year's taught me anything, and I've known this all along, but I always flirt with it, that there's nothing more handy than having blokes in your team that just play every week that you can guarantee on a score, because if you have double finger injuries.
Yes.
You need guys like this playing.
Correct, Hef. And then you get donuts and then you get fined.
I only got 2 fines this whole year, mate. 2 donuts. That's fine. That's good for a keeper league.
Doesn't really help anyone at the Crows, though, with Kelly leaving. I think it would just mean that someone like a McPherson or whatever just becomes a proper lockdown. So,
no fantasy scoring on the result of that. Anyway, another one that is going to be pretty fantasy relevant. I feel like I've left all the good fantasy relevant ones to you. I did talk about Cherry and Dawson, so yeah.
Will Brodie. So he's moved over to Fremantle now. We all know that he has scoring ability. It's just, will the move to WA help him get a game? Obviously, it's interesting the cogs that are moving in that Fremantle side. So we know Chera's gone. Interestingly, guys like Reece Conker and who else got delisted? Brett
quite a
Bewley.
few.
Yeah.
Taylor Demand.
Jaman and
Yeah.
Tobe Watson are defenders.
Don't really matter,
But
yeah.
Bewley and Conker are genuine, depth players or players that played most weeks, kind of through the midfield wing role. So, with Brodie coming in, it potentially just means that he can actually get a first go start if they do think he's good enough. Look, just the sky could be the limit, or he could just be an absolute flash in the pan. We're going to find out, because he only played the 4 AFL games this season, had a 67-point PB. But if you want to know his pedigree, you don't know enough. Look, he averaged 117 in 9 VFL matches this season, had 7 games of 100 plus, had 4 games 120 plus, and PB'd with 152 in the VFL. So, look, he's a very, very good fantasy scorer. Does he have the chops, the speed for AFL level? I think we're really going to find out early next year.
Yeah, and look, some of his averages over the last couple of seasons have been pretty bad, which you've mentioned, but it's more so he's just genuinely played out of position. So he comes in, plays on that wing, we should do for Fremantle.
Yeah, I think even looking at his time on ground, it was so low when he was playing at Gold Coast. So
the thing is, he could start with forward status, so yeah,
would be handy
if he
could be that one that's a free swing.
The thing is, I think he had forward status this year, but in looking at his VFL numbers, they were quite large. So that indicates that he was playing midfield time. So yeah, but anyway.
His teammate, Geordie Clark. Now, this is a similar kind of guy to Brodie. Purely fantasy hyped. He's got a bit more talent than Brodie, I think, but just purely stuffed opportunity at Geelong. Look, I think he's going to land on a wing at the Dockers. Purely played round 23, so he's in their last team there. So I think he's one who can slot in. Compliments, guys like Darcy Tucker, Blake Acres, James Aish, as well as those runners in that side. So he's got some polish, just needs to get his fitness right, because I think that's always been the key with him, or the issue, I suppose, with him at Geelong. Just needs to get motivated, keen, and AFL ready. So he could even slot across half back, but I think that Hayden Young's got that sewn up. I like Hayden Young being that mover from the half back line along with Luke Ryan. So look, Clark's in for a big year, gone there for a reason, I think. Had 79 only from 66% time on ground in round 21. Also turned up 3 times in the VFL. So he's got the pedigree, just needs the opportunity, probably just needs to get his body right, and he could be in for a big 2022.
Nathan Wilson was one that was still playing a bit last year, wasn't he? So there's a spot that you could probably take off halfback flank as well.
There's a few spots out for grabs at Fremantle.
Yeah.
And they're building well. So I think, they've got a good core nucleus of younger players, and if they can add, someone like Brodie and Clark into that side who take that next step, they could actually jump up the ladder quickly next year.
They almost made finals this year, so they were quite handy. I think just a few additions like this could really see them propel up to finals contention for sure. All right, let's move on to Jonathan Segler, Big Segs. He moved to Geelong, and I have a big soft spot for this guy. So he was a premiership ruckman in my Dynasty League teams here. I think he had 97 in the grand final, which was super handy considering I had Big Boy and Paddy Ryder as my other ruck. So to have Segler come in and Ryder was injured, but to outscore Big Boy and actually play a decent role in a fantasy premiership, I was pretty happy with that. But yeah, Geelong really finally have an excuse to drop Reece Stanley. He's 30, so he's not really a player that you're going after if you're going for youth or you're looking for the future. He's
definitely sits in that Geelong trading window perfectly.
Exactly.
Bring in the oldies.
Yep, exactly. But yeah, if you are looking to push for a flag, he's definitely a player for you, especially if you're lacking in the ruck department. You can get him quite cheap if he belongs to a team, or you're going to get him pretty decent round in the draft as well. I don't think he's going to go super early, just given his age as well. But yeah, he averaged 85 from round 13 onwards last year, and 76 for the season, which really isn't bad considering he was rucking in tandem for most of the games he was playing. And I think it's really good news for Ned Reeves owners as well, people that picked him up off the waivers last year, or he was going to be available in a few drafts because people would have overlooked him. But it kind of clears up a number 1 ruck spot for him as well, I think. McAvoy will pinch hit, and I think Reeves will probably left to do the heavy lifting. Your face looks like you don't agree with that.
Oh, really?
Who you've got in mind? The big Lynch.
Max Lynch arrived at Hawthorn.
I know that, but I think it's more of a replacement for Segler going down. I think Reeves, they still want to develop and go forward.
I hope so, Hef.
Yeah, so do I. But Lynch is another one that we'll talk about in a second. But before we do that, we'll talk about Mabior Cholkaz.
So he averaged 60.5 this year as that ruck forward. Look, seems like the media always want to hype him as his ruck ability. But look, despite only kicking the 7 goals last year, I think he's a forward who's going to back up in the ruck. You got to assume that Jared Witts, who got injured maybe round 3 or 4 last year, he'll be ready to go round 1. So that should be the perfect fit for Chol and the Suns. Look, he's really good around the ground. He's got a good tank. Just has some things to work on for his fantasy game to lift, because 7 of his 10 games last year were under 70. So, look, I think he's going to be a good play if you do own Witts. He should get that ruck forward status, which can be handy as well if you just need some, spot fillers and some depth in that side. But I don't think I'm too excited from a fantasy point of view, but definitely one to be handcuffing because you just never know how guys come back from ACLs. And if Jared Witts doesn't get up, I think Cho will have to be the number 1 ruck because they don't really have too many other options apart from who was playing Graham and
Chrissy Burgess.
And Burgess. So I think if things go wrong, Cho will be number 1. So would be a very smart pickup if you are a Witts owner.
Yeah, I think definitely for the first half of the season because Witts will still be out for the first little bit, won't he?
Interesting. He did his knee early on, so
they
get back before 12 months.
Yeah. But still, I think if you're a Witts owner, you need to be handcuffing that one. So you need to be on him. Let's talk about Max Lynch, as we mentioned before.
Yeah, look, so he did put his name on my radar this season. He scored pretty well in the VFL, averaged 90 in his 7 games there, also turned up 3 times, averaged a massive 32 hitouts, which is pretty good too. So played 2 AFL games as well. What do you have? 55 and 68. Played against the Crows and the D's, which isn't too bad. So I think it could be a solid ruckman. I suppose the thing that's worried me and potentially worries you, Hef, what's happening with Ned Reeves? I know you touched on it earlier. You've firmly got Ned Reeves as number 1 and Lynch has just come in there as backup?
Yeah, I think they just couldn't go into another season like if they lose Segler without a backup ruck. I think Reeves is their go-to for the future. He's actually pretty handy this year. Plus, he's a monster as well.
He's a monster. Super tall. But if there's one club who like to fuck you with rucks, it's Hawthorn.
You reckon?
Oh, we've always had the Segler, Big Boy. Where's Big Boy playing?
Well, I think
Big Boy's going to play fullback.
The issue was more so that Reeves got injured. Segler came in and dominated, and it was hard for him to get back in. But then he did get back in, but then I think they just finished off tried to boost Segler's trade value towards the end, I think, as well.
The other thing you got to watch out, new coach at Hawthorn. So
that's the big thing.
Does Smitch like Ned Reeves?
I think he does. I think he's going to be, I think the thing with Mitchell, he's just going to be going youth, development, rebuild.
The unfortunate thing is if you're a Big Boy owner, you're going to have to take 2 ruck handcuffs, I think.
Yeah, you're gonna have to try to get both of them because it's going to be hard to tell which one's going to be the guy. But I don't see a bump or anything for Max Lynch. I think he's there just as filler, really. But I could be proven wrong. Wait and see. Luke Dunstan went to Melbourne. So look, he played 12
when
games.
Braden Pruce went to Melbourne.
I don't mind this one as much, but anyway, I'll talk about that. I'll explain that a bit more. So he's played 12 games last season for an average of 94, and we all know he was out of favour, but he seemed to be walking on eggshells when he was playing. Whenever he played as well, he could be out the side at any moment, really. But yeah, when he did play, he scored really well, and he forced his way into the side mid-year just through good VFL performances. So he came in in round 11 and remained there for 11 out of the last 13 games. So he had some big scores when he did play, but the thing is about those big scores, I think we're overlooking by a lot of people, is they all came against like the bottom sides. So he had 140 versus North Melbourne, had 117 versus Collingwood, and 111 versus Adelaide. But he did have 100 against Brisbane, but they were like his biggest scores, and they all came against just like bottom feeders. So it's hard to tell where he's really at, and it might have more to do with St Kilda just not being that good as well, so they can only beat up on those bottom times. But I think the big thing with him going to Melbourne is he genuinely must believe that he can crack into that midfield because he wants to play in a premiership. I reckon that's what he's thinking, and he reckons he can get in, over your James Jordan or something like that, one of your youngsters, your Sparrows, your things like that, and he reckons he can go in there and complement that midfield nicely. So I think that is what his mindset is, and I would actually back him to be in their best 22 for sure.
You reckon?
Yeah, I reckon I would. So just not as like playing a prominent role, but he would be in there. So yeah, and I think just people wanted him to go to a shitter team because they wanted it for the fantasy.
Of course,
thing.
we're all selfish.
But I think he actually wants to get the best out of himself, and I think he's got genuine belief in himself. So I think it's fine.
I honestly just don't know who spot he's taking.
Yeah, well, I thought James Jordan immediately.
You reckon? But he was so good this year. And Tom Sparrow's a good player.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. Even like James Harms as well. Someone who
James Harms is a good player.
Yeah, I know. They're all good players. They're premiership players, but I reckon he's on those guys' level. That if he works hard enough, he could get to that kind of tier. He could get ahead of that tier easy. But yeah, it just depends on his work rate and how bad he wants it, I think.
If not, he's a very good depth player for that side.
But that said, though, in terms of fantasy, I don't think he's going to score well because he's going to be not enough. There's too many mouths to feed now.
Where would you take him?
Yeah, he'd be kept in most leagues, wouldn't he?
You'd keep Luke Dunstan.
Probably my team.
Who's almost never been best 22 at St Kilda, and is going to a premiership team who has one of the best midfields and young midfields in the competition.
He didn't get kept in our podcasters league, and he was available, and people picked him up and were actually pretty well rewarded by getting him. Look, it's going to be hard to keep him. Depends how deep you go. I just don't see him scoring that well at Melbourne, so it's probably not worth the risk, I don't think. But he's a player that could prove you wrong, I think.
I just don't know if he's capable, and I don't know where you take him. It's just one of those hard ones, because he was that guy who he had the highest average last year or something like that, didn't he? Because he played the one game, and he was just sitting at the top of all drafts because he had the highest average, and then didn't really play to the end of the year. It's frustrating because it's hard to know what's going to happen, but I don't think I'd be keeping him. I don't even know if I'd be having a crack at him.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. It's a risk versus reward pick.
Correct.
So he's going to go early, and the player picks me is either going to be rewarded big time or it's going to burn.
Correct.
Yeah, so that's how it's going to work.
Callum Coleman-Jones has headed to North Melbourne, so he's the former number 20 pick and should become next ruckman at the Roos after Goldie. So in the meantime, I think he's going to be a pretty nice piece of that North Melbourne forward line. You've got Larky, Zerha, and now Callum Coleman-Jones. Looked dangerous when he played some games at Richmond this year, kicked some nice goals. Look, he even stated that he wants to become the number one ruck. So see how Goldie goes. I know that they recruited Jacob Edwards as that ruckman in the mid-season draft last year. He's still going to be young and fresh. So if you do need a natural ruck forward option, I think Callum Coleman-Jones will be that guy. Look, he played 7 games last year, and look, when he wasn't injured, so he had one injury-affected game, his minimum score was 50. So puts up at least a nice floor for a big guy. Look, I think he's worth a mid to late pick. I think Goldie owners will definitely need to try and handcuff him. But if you're trying to, white ant a Goldstein owner, I reckon he could be one of the sneaky ruck forward pickups next year because I think he's going to progress to be a nice ruckman in the future.
They played someone mid-year who was like a ruck forward, and he got consistent games, but he was terrible. He barely touched. Was it Cherry?
Cherry.
One of their ruckmen, like ruck forwards that they played. So there could be a spot for him coming straight in. So yeah, and
I think he'll play. He'll play round one because he's a threat up forward, and he's probably the best ruck forward other option.
Yeah, there's definitely, and they're North Melbourne, so there's definitely going to be potential there. You got I guess Nick Larky up forward as well, but he doesn't really do that much ruck work. I'm just trying to think. They did play a couple. They did play a couple games where they played Goldstein up forward. And they played Charlie. Was it Charlie Coleman that played those few games? And he scored
Cherry played. What did he play?
Late on in the season.
He played mid-season for 8 games.
Yeah, that's what I mean. He got 8 games in a row, and it was and it was terrible. So he barely touched the thing. So it feels like it's a role that they want to exploit, a key forward ruck type thing. And he could be the go-to guy for them. So I reckon he's going to be in line with the game. I just don't know how well he's going to score. That's all. But we'll wait and see what happens there.
I think it'll be handy.
Okay. We'll move on to Port Adelaide, Jeremy Finlayson. So he's basically just there to play Laddams' role up forward if he's best 22. So you got to remember he's behind Dixon, Georgiades and Marshall already straight off the bat. We're playing Laddams. We're playing this quadrangle of doom with 4 tools that just kind of worked some weeks when we were beating up on shit teams like Port usually do, but didn't really work against the better teams going in there. But I'm not sure if Finlayson is going to be overly fruitful in terms of fantasy scoring. We all know Laddams really struggled up forward at Port Adelaide just because he was behind those names. And we'll talk about the Laddams trade soon, but I was talking to you before the show, the actual decision to trade Laddams is kind of baffling when you're... I think we got what he was worth, don't get me wrong, but I just thought there was no point trading him unless you were going to get way overs for him and there's no point picking up... I don't know. Finlayson was super cheap, but I don't think he offers that much more. He can't go on the ruck and play a backup ruck role like Laddams can. I don't know. I just don't rate the trade at all. And that trade, and then getting Finlayson in is kind of a bit of a nothing one for me.
Are they worried that Big Charlie's on his last legs?
Well, there's rumours that he was going to get traded this year. Apparently there was a rumour he sold his house in Adelaide and his missus moved up to Gold Coast and things like that. So, but I think he's definitely getting towards the end of his career. But I don't think Finlayson is the answer. I'd rather go to the draft.
So who's going to be the second ruck?
Sam Hayes. So
in a game.
Oh, probably no. We won't play. Well, we'll play Dixon, I guess, as the tall.
As the backup.
Yeah, as a backup. Yeah. But we might play Hayes, but I just don't see he can't really play forward. He was the best and fairest ruckman in the reserves. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting. I just don't see Finlayson as just immediate best 22. And in terms of fantasy, which is what we had to talk about, just don't see him being anything unless he can like go back to his like early career and be a halfback flanker type thing, which I just don't see that happening either.
Could he swing? Because he's probably a better swingman than Dixon, Georgiades or Marshall.
Maybe, but we've got heaps of those types anyway. So I don't know. I'd rather do something like play Marshall in that role. Anyway, if that was the case, probably a bit more athletic.
So what will he average next year if he does actually get a game?
65, I reckon. But yeah, anyway, we'll move on to another guy that's probably not that fantasy relevant, and that is Robbie Tarrant. He has been serviceable in the past. I think last year in the Corona Ball, he was actually quite serviceable. We put up, some good mid-60s scores, which were like, equivalents to 80 BCVs. But I don't think anything really changes for him in terms of role or job security. Just struggled last year after having kidney surgery and then had a groin niggle early too. But yeah, he's been a handy player in the past, as I said, but I just think he's one of those good bench/reserve options that are going to be available in most drafts, but it's not worth looking further than that. I think he'll average 65 again, or 60, around that, but then have a few games here and there where he gets some big 80s or tons up there. I think he had one big ton last year. So yeah, he's capable of doing it.
Going to Richmond, he's going to be the guy that they're going to leave as the pure defender and just let all the other boys float across like Vlosten,
Bolter.
But yeah, they can just kind of have free reign and Terrence locked down. So he's serviceable, but I think there's probably better defender options next year than Robbie Tarrant, who's probably going to be 33.
Yeah, list filler, plays every week, takes up a spot on your bench. That's basically what he does. Look, Peter Adams. We're on to Sydney now. So, look, if Peter Adams can get the number one ruck role at Sydney, then I am super, super keen. And he should be listed as a forward for next year too, which would be really handy. But I'm just not sure if he does get that number one ruck role. That's the issue. So Hickey was just so effective last season. And Sydney probably see themselves as a finals fancy again after where they finished last season. And yeah, you saw them play players like Amadi and McLean, as ruck forwards too. So I think he's kind of come in to be like a more higher quality version of those, but only just of one of those two type players. So, but yeah, the thing is, if he does get the number one role, then he can go huge. So he averaged 91 in the patch where Lycett was out suspended this season. I think it was over 5 weeks because of the buy in there. But then he still had 72 average for the season, and that included 2 sub-30 scores in there. So it's not too bad because those would have brought the numbers down. So he had a couple big games rucking in tandem when he was playing at forward too, where he kicked a few goals, but they were pretty few and far between. I think you've just got to monitor the preseason with Sydney and just see what role he's going to be playing. If he can get the number one ruck role, say if he just comes on leaps and bounds and Hickey gets on a bit or he gets injured or something like that, he could be huge, and especially if he's listed as a forward. But just thinking about Port Adelaide rucks as well. If you own Lycett, because you would have been playing Laddams as a handcuff, you're going to grab Sam Hayes, who I mentioned before, won the reserves best and fairest for Port Adelaide. So he's coming through the ranks and he's going to be quite handy as well. So you're going to have to grab him as a handcuff in case Lycett goes down, because obviously you can't use Laddams as that anymore because he plays for Sydney.
Correct.
Yeah. Anything to add to that?
No, I think he's going to be playing week in, week out. Just what his scoring output would be, and if he can wrestle that number one ruck spot off Hickey, that's going to be the question. How old is he? Like 23, 24?
Yeah, around that.
So he's going to be the next guy in there.
The transition period you get him for, where he switches between being key forward to number one ruck, that's when you want him.
You want that year where it switches over.
Yeah, you want that year, because if he's listed as a forward, you can potentially put up like Rowan Marshall type numbers in that kind of year, that transition year, listed as a ruck forward. But yeah, we'll see what happens.
Pure ruck.
Yeah.
Sam Petreski-Seaton has moved to the West Coast, and look, I'm pretty happy that he's left Carlton, where he just wasn't developing. But I suppose the big question is, what position does he play at the Eagles? We know they've got an aging midfield. Shuey, Gaff, Sheed, they're all getting on. So does he finally get a chance to go into that middle? I'm not too sure. So 2019, probably his best season, averaged 77.7, and that's the best we've seen on him. So he's back home in WA. Could that help him mentally? Not too sure. But look, the big one is, will he keep defender status? If so, he can be worth a look and definitely hold if you're an owner. But if he's only mid-only, it does make him a lot riskier. I think he'll be one that a lot of coaches will take the punt on, because there would have been a lot that have held him through some pretty tough times. And now we're potentially seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. So he was one of those kids who was actually a pretty well-proven fantasy scorer, I think, from numbers. So if he can kind of get into that midfield and do what he kind of promised as a junior, I reckon there could be some numbers there for him.
I can't see it happening. I don't know. He just doesn't strike me the fantasy type. I don't know why. I think he's kind of... days are almost numbered as well. This is like a real
Carlton
lifeline.
were playing him off as like a halfback flanger back pocket, and it just wasn't his go. Like if he's that bull or whatever, that used to be as a kid. Like, get him in that midfield. You know, they need a bit of grunt in there. They've got a good young midfield coming through.
It doesn't look like the player that will provide that grunt, though. I don't know.
So would you take the risk?
I wouldn't, no.
You wouldn't keep him?
Nah.
Okay.
I'd let him go. In our league, when you're only keeping 16,
But you keep Luke Dunstan.
No, 50-50 on that one. But if Dunstan plays, he scores. It's more about the job security issue. You just got to monitor that one.
So you keep Dunstan over Petrovsky-Seton?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, definitely. He's a proven fantasy scorer when he plays.
It's true, but don't you like some new role, new club? It's always fresh outlook. I reckon he could be a handy scorer.
I do like that if it doesn't feel like he's just been thrown a lifeline as like a last-ditch effort to kind of save his career type thing. That's what I feel like.
But there's like Shuey's always injured. Redden's old. Gas getting on. Like, there's spots in that midfield up for grabs. There's spots in that team.
Yeah, I just don't know if he's the guy you want replacing in the midfield for those players. Last one, Case.
Timmy O'Brien.
Big name.
Yeah, interesting one. Real keeper league kind of player here. But the Dogs needed a bit more height and have recruited that kind of tall swingman player. Look, assuming he plays back, which he finished off the year well for the Hawks, what did he average? 83 in his last three, even tonned up. So not too bad across half back. It's just going to be interesting to see where he sits in that side. If he plays defence, I think his score is going to be much better than if he plays forward because, forwards don't necessarily score as well. But we know that Josh Bruce did his knee late, so maybe they need him to play up there with, English and Norton. So that's the one. Or if he swings, I'm kind of keen on his prospects, but could be worth a late flyer. Doesn't super excite me, but look, he's shown that he can score if the role's right. Does have that ability, but he's a bit old. He's like 27, 28. So look, just more of a depth player, but one who I'd be taking over, a couple of the other, key defenders, key tools around.
All right, that wraps up the trade and free agency recap. There will be some delisted free agents and stuff like that, which we'll talk about in the future when they actually happen, but we thought it was important just to wrap that up straight after the period so we could talk about that and get a podcast out there for you to listen to. Anyways, there's a few questions that came through, so we'll get onto them. All right, Kays, who's the first question come from?
From @HenryCats. Who's worth targeting out of the delisted players? Is anyone worth taking a stab at who might get a lifeline?
The big one this week's been Charlie Constable. So a lot of people are baffled that he has been delisted, just given what he's shown. I know, like Geelong obviously have their reasons, and that is a few fitness things, a bit of tank, all that sort of stuff. But we've seen him be a pretty handy fantasy scorer, especially for a guy his age when he has played. So he's going to be one that's, it's going to be on a lot of people's lips if he does get picked up, which he probably should. The other one, Kay, is friend of the show, Trent Dumont. You were pretty devastated about this one?
I just can't see how he's not best 22 at North Melbourne.
No, they're that bad. They obviously just want to play the kids through there, and it might be just a bit of an elaborate ploy to maybe get Froggy back home in South Australia. So which would probably be handy for us, as podcast hosts.
Interesting to know some of the background details there, but
might have to give him a call at some stage, and when it's all blown over,
base.
We'll see what's happening.
Look, for me, I like James Cousins, one who could get picked up. I didn't think he did too much wrong at Hawthorn. Obviously, there's your boy Damon Graves as well. Hefs.
Greaves, you still can't say his name right.
I know, but look, he's another one who could pop up without too much surprise. Who else? Just looking through the lists. Does Tom Lynch get another crack? It doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, not now. Daniel Talia electing to have a year off, essentially retire.
And then retired.
Even though he's not fantasy relevant. I thought he was good enough to play somewhere else.
Obviously his body's just cactus, I think. That's
maybe.
Obviously what it is. And obviously fill-in, Braden Sire.
He's another big one.
Could he get a go?
I think he's done. But yeah, again, he's shown some fantasy pedigree in the past. If he does, I just don't know if he wants it hard, bad enough. That's all.
Yeah. The other interesting one, apparently Rock the Casbolt's heading to Gold Coast.
I've heard that I thought it was talking about Brisbane as well before they picked up Geelong Ruckman.
I'm a real sucker for Rock the Casbolt because he just clunks so many
Darcy
marks.
Fort, that's who it was. Yeah, no, definitely. I've heard that too.
Charles up there, but say Witts has a delayed preseason, Casbolt's up there, and Charles up there. I think both of them will play.
Are you going to pick up Rock the Casbolt if he's picked up again? You're going to spend your last pick on him?
Of course I am.
Yeah, of course you will. Anyway, at AJS Hawker, is Max Lynch worth a stash? To see how he works with Reeves and Big Boy, likely to only go for one more season. You did the Lynch research. What do you think?
Yeah, look, if you've got him and you're playing like a genuine, what's it called? Dynasty League. Potentially he's worth a stash because he has shown a bit. I agree with Hef. I'm in camp Reeves as opposed to camp Lynch. But do you have to take both? I don't know.
Yeah, you do.
If you're going to put a gun to my head and say which one do you want to start next season, I'd be Reeves.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I know. But just going back to it, you need to have all three of those guys in your side, just in case you don't have a Ruttman or you want to have a very good Ruttman from another side in your side. I think if as a stash, you'd want to be a deep league, deep dynasty, just like you said, then you could make a case, but yeah, not if it's a shallower one, that's for sure. At Isaac_WF, George Hewitt worth a look with back status and potentially playing midfield. We kind of touched on this already.
But if you've called it, he's got back status.
No, I didn't call it. I said common sense will probably mean he loses it, but
Hef called it.
He's
got back status, and if he does, I think he's definitely worth a play.
Right now, Champion Data has him listed as a midfield defender. So you have to wait and see.
First.
You have to wait and see. I don't think he'll keep it, just for the record. Next one, Kays, what's the question?
At Stando101, Haitley, any chance of getting a game at the Crows now?
Yeah, I think so. Like with Haitley, there was a lot of groin issues that's come out since kind of the end of the season that he was struggling with all year. And if you look back through the injury report, when he missed sample games, it was just like groin. So I haven't written off Haitley just yet. I definitely am a lot more nervous than I was about him last year. But what we saw him kind of be able to produce in the Crows preseason trials and things like that, I think there was some genuine injury concerns with him. So I'll be willing to throw him a lifelong in my Keeper League team and pick him up somewhere in the draft.
And what we've seen from the Crows midfield, last year, like they still needed a couple bigger body guys in there. Like, Schoenberg's developing nicely. They've still got Sloan, Keys is in there as well. But, they can't just roll Berry or Cook or something like that straight in there. They need that bit more developed. So Haitley's that guy. And, I hate talking about Hef, but just off the top of my head, he could be a great classic pickup next year. He'll be cheap as chips, wouldn't he?
Because he played a few games, he might not be. I'm not sure what his average was, so it depends on that.
That's why you don't listen to me for fantasy advice.
I can't remember off the top of my head what he would be priced at, but I'm not that fantasy focused. I mean, classic focused as much as you make me out to be.
Yes, you are.
Anyway, Nathan Ayres, with Dawson's move, does that help him with increasing his average on 88 last season? What can you see him averaging? And the other question is, does Langford keep forward status? So what do you see Dawson averaging next season?
100.
I think 95, on the wing.
I'm big on Dorso.
The only thing I'm not thinking 100 is like you don't see a lot of outside types go that large. Like they're usually around the 90 mark. But I think he's going to have a big season moving clubs, though. He'll have that bit of a bump.
Paul says an average like 95. Jordan Dawson is twice the player.
I think he'll be about the same, because he'll get that kind of role. And they'll still use Seedsman.
For me, there's no betrading Dawson, even if he lost back status.
Yeah, no, I'll be keeping him too. But yeah, it's just I hope he keeps back status. I think he will for one more season anyway. And Langford, does he keep forward status?
You're the guru.
He's listed as a midfielder only. I'm not a guru. I'm just going what champion did I have him listed.
You're a guru. I would, off my Remedy kombucha gut feel, I think he's a mid only next year.
Well, I didn't watch heaps of Essendon because you generally do the Essendon games. And I usually watch other games if someone's playing, just kind of cover podcast stuff. But yeah, every time I saw him, he seemed to be kind of further up the ground in the midfield on a wing, that sort of thing as well. So that's Langford. I think will be a midfielder only as well, which would be unfortunate for owners. But he's every chance of getting it back when a few players develop and come through that midfield.
He rolls into that tough to keep position as a mid-only.
He always does every year, doesn't he?
As a mid-only, it makes it tougher.
Yeah, true. But even as a forward, sometimes he's hard to keep, depending on what role he actually gets. Just looking through the stream chat, what we've got, Casbolt at Suns, we talked about that. Thoughts on Dunstan and Fiorini. So we talked about Dunstan earlier. What do you think about Fiorini going into this season? Do you think he can be trusted to go do what he did at the end of last season?
I don't trust Braden Fiorini ever.
I trust Fiorini. I don't trust Stuart Dew. That's my issue. So, with Anderson, with Rao coming back through, does that kind of put Fiorini back to the pack a bit?
But then, there's a lot of kids still coming. We didn't see, who was that? Jeremy Sharp only came in late.
Yeah, the draftee.
Yeah.
That was good. I can't remember
the good draftee boy. Yeah.
Early draft pick. It's going to come to me, but I can't get it. But there was quite a few that didn't actually kind of debut this year as well. That he didn't debut.
And they've still got a lot of, like Gold Coast throughout their whole list have a lot of good quality players. So I'm just padding.
Yeah, trying to remember the name. It's
But
not coming.
like Sam Flanders, still gets opportunity. Elijah Hollins is the player.
That's the one.
Thinking
Yes.
about. So he didn't play a game at all last year.
Yeah.
What happens with Rory Atkins? He had a stinker. Does he bounce back?
Elijah Hollins is a mid forward though, so you could roll up there a bit as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
But how does it hurt Fiorini? I'm not sure.
Yeah. I just don't trust Stuart Dew. Like, I think he'll prioritise kids over him, and I think he did because he had Rao just, easing back into it. You had Anderson playing a bit like more of an outside role. You think he'll move more inside as he progresses. So, yeah, I just don't trust Stewie Dew. So I'm not big on Fiorini. I'd be trying to sell high if I could, I reckon, right now. And the only other thing was Warnie saying epic work on the stream, Hef. So give myself a pat on the back for that one.
Pat yourself on the back.
Thank you, Warn Dog. All right, that wraps up the trade and free agency recap podcast. Make sure you get around us on our socials at Keeper League Pod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Anyone who ordered a black T-shirt, we should have worn those on the pod tonight. Actually, they got sent out last Friday, so I think one got delivered today. I saw on my Australia Post account. And I think the rest are pretty close to those who ordered them. But so keep your eye out for those people who ordered those. There might be a few leftovers for sale later on. We'll have to count them up and see what we got. But stay tuned to our socials if you want to get yourself a black Keeper League tee. There's a few white ones as well. Thank you to Remedy Kombucha, and make sure you renew your membership if you signed up before November last season. So people who signed up after November, they will automatically renew if you want to keep going. Whereas people who signed up before have to manually renew from your account page on keeperleaguepod.com.au. So just a reminder, if you do want to keep going as a member and you signed up before November last year, you'll need to automatically renew. You have to manually renew your account. But anyways, we'll leave it at that, Kays. Any final words from you?
No final words. I hope this remedy really helps my gut.
So do I, mate, for your sake. We'll be back for the members around draft time to do our draft special, and stay tuned to our website for a few draft profiles that will be going up in early November. So you'll see from us and you'll hear from us soon. Enjoy your off season, I guess.
Correct.
Take it easy.
See you guys.
See you later.